Welcome, family and friends, to ACSA, to Common Purpose and Common Times. I'm Wes Smith, and as always, honored to serve as your executive director. Want to make sure that you're aware, once again, this Wednesday, we're going to have our ACSA Legislative Brunch at 1 o'clock on Facebook, as well as on YouTube. Edgar Zazueta will be looking at happenings at CDE, which are always exciting. Things like the waiver, the template. We're going to have some superintendents, Joey Adame and Amy Alzina, on to talk about in-person instruction, lessons learned. So that'll be great. We won't have a campus tour this week, so don't look for that tomorrow. But Wednesday, we will have the legislative lunch break. I want to thank Region 6. When I started these broadcasts, we thought maybe the pandemic and the shutdown will be a couple weeks long. I've got plenty of ACSA branded shirts, so I don't have to repeat too often, right? Well, 6 months later, that's not the case. So Region 6 sent me a nice ACSA shirt with Region 6 on it. So I want to thank them. Appreciate it. Love the color. If the rest of you want some branding on Common Purpose, I'm a size large. I don't look it, but I am. So thanks, Region 6. We got a great show for you tonight. We try to bring in experts from the field, and experts including all of you who are experts in the work that you do. We've talked to superintendents and site administrators, and now we're going to talk about HR and personnel and the experiences and lessons learned as you are reopening schools in California and everything that comes with that. But before we do, something that you might not know about me, I was, in my undergraduate training, a feminist criticism major. And why? Well, because I grew up in a place, in a family that was pretty misogynistic, where I was told that women were the weaker sex. And I struggled with that because the strongest people I'd ever met were women, in fact. My mom, who was a single mom most of my life, did amazing things to support us. My grandmother was the strongest person until now, because I put my wife in that category as well. Really the strongest people I've ever met. I remember having pneumonia, and I was very, very young. But I remember my grandmother, and I didn't remember this part, but I was told later, carried me for 24 hours. And whenever she would sit down, I would start to cry, and so she would stand up. I also remember being a senior, or having a senior in high school when I was a freshman, put me up against the locker because the mistaken identity. Thought I had done something I didn't. Well, small town, she found out about it. And two of my family members had to restrain her from rushing to that high school and telling that senior what she thought of him. My grandmother's one of my heroes. And so it's tonight with a heavy heart that I reflect on another feminist warrior and hero, and that's Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. What a loss for all of us, regardless of your politics, and not getting into this debate about what happens next, but just to honor who she was as a human being. To think about her being one of 9 women in her class at the Harvard Law School. 500 men were at the school. She was one of 9 women at the school. Women were not allowed into the library to study. They weren't called on in class. When she applied for the school, the entrance counselor asked her why she should take the spot of a man. When she got out of school, she couldn't get a job as a law clerk, even though she was a valedictorian at Harvard. When she was preparing cases for the Supreme Court, she was told by men, you should let men argue that case at the Supreme Court. She didn't. She argued famously and historically her cases, and then earned a seat on that same court. She fought for women, minorities, the LGBTQ plus community. Most of all, she fought that the Constitution, when it speaks of we the people, that we isn't confined to a race, a gender, a religion, a sexual orientation. She fought for inclusivity. And so it's a heavy heart today that I reflect on heroes in my past and one of my other heroes, Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. But let's get into the show tonight. We've got some amazing guests with us. We have Cindy Frazee, who is the brain trust behind our HR council. They call her the president, but she's so much more than that, and a friend of mine. And Laura Preston is also a dear friend of mine, and one of the people at ACSA that took me under her wing when I was a member of ACSA. And she's taught me about as much as I know about advocacy and doing the right thing for the right reason. So love her and glad she's with us tonight. And we're going to talk about human relations, personnel, and what folks are doing in the field to prepare, or have been doing to prepare for this year, and the challenges they're solving in the moment. I'll remind all of you, if you have questions for Cindy or for Laura, please put them in the chat. We'll ask them when we have a chance to do so. And I look forward to hearing everything they have to share. Cindy, let's start with this issue of safely reopening schools. We've been planning all summer, since the spring, when we knew this was going to be the issue. And so walk us through the major topics and conversations that you, as an HR personnel expert, that you were having in this preparation. And then I also want to ask you about small group and cohorts and how that looks now. But walk us through that process and lessons you learned, please.
Well, Wes, thank you. And thank you very much for having me this evening. I feel very honored to be speaking on behalf of an incredible group of individuals from our Human Resources Council. And I think as we're preparing and we were looking over the summer to try to look at reopening, I think the first thing that always comes to mind is safety. And we're looking at the safety of our employees, looking at the safety of how we're going to be safe for students, and constantly having to learn as COVID has transformed over time. We didn't know a lot about it in March, and I think there's still a lot we don't know, but there's things we've learned along the way where we've had to pivot and do things differently. When we're looking at the safety components, following all of our guidelines from the CDPH and following the reopening, the safe reopening plan that they put forward, looking for those changes and making sure that those things are in place for our staffs, as well as knowing that they'll be in place for our students. I think that's number one, first and foremost. And then obviously the part that HR doesn't have as much to do with, and that's setting up what learning will look like. And that's another part for another conversation. But I think as we're looking at reopening, the number one safety thing over the summer has been, how are we going to set up safety? How are we going to bring in students? What are the safety guidelines in regard to that? The 6-foot distancing, looking at all of our facilities, looking at how many people we can safely get into a facility, looking at outdoor spaces. It goes on and on. And as HR, we're the people that help support that and help nudge and support our employees moving forward.
Oh, that's great, Cindy. And by the way, I should mention too that like all of our ACSA members, I'll often celebrate, yay, what you do at ACSA, but you have a day job, by the way, that actually pays you. And Cindy is the associate superintendent of HR in San Dieguito Union High School District. And I'm especially grateful because your district has helped a lot. Your superintendent has been on our calls, you've been on our calls. And so we really want to give a shout out to San Dieguito and thank you for helping your colleagues in the state. As you've done that, you mentioned some of these nuances. Is there one thing you've learned that's been really, really helpful? Is there some innovation, some lesson that another person shared with you, something that you'd share with the field as you've problem solved, PPE, social distance, testing, et cetera?
Wes, I think it's the thing that we're always supposed to do in human resources is we do a lot of listening. People are fearful, and rightfully so. It's okay. But I think, sitting down and listening to groups of teachers, groups of classified, talking about how together we're looking at putting all of these pieces in place and giving them an opportunity to talk about, have you done this? How are you doing this? And us being responsive to that. I think that's really critical as we're trying to help people, come back and making sure that we've got the right supports in places for students. That's probably the number one thing that any of us can do right now. And it's also listening to each other and taking our ideas and always thinking, what can I do with that next creative idea when we're trying to put together If we're going to bring back small groups, how are we going to bring back small groups? It's very different in elementary schools compared to high schools, different numbers of students in classes. So how are we going to maybe identify and bring those students back? And so all of those pieces, it really comes down to compassion and listening.
Why am I not surprised that an expert like you has said, listen, compassion, working together as much as you have already in this short time. I'll often say that HR, sure, it's human resources, but it's about human relations. It really comes down to those relationships we have with the other adults in our system and the students we serve. So thank you for bringing that up. I'm curious, are you doing or have you solved the testing issue, or do you know others that have? I know that's a big question, Cindy, around the state about getting people back safely and doing regular testing. Is that something you guys have been able to figure out already?
Well, I don't get to take credit, but it's my understanding. We have an outstanding San Diego County Department of Education is amazing. And they are currently working on trying to get testing set up within San Diego County. So then our employees can go and have access to that testing. I think that that's the challenge up and down the state. We want to make sure that we're doing our testing. We set up all of our safety practices. Now we're turning into contact tracers because we have to keep track of who's on our campuses. So all of those pieces we've had to learn along the way, but we're very fortunate because our county office is really taking the lead on that.
That's a great resource to have. And we've got great counties around the state, but where they're able to step up and come together and solve this for groups and not just individually. It certainly benefits students and communities, right? For us to put our heads together. And I'll tell you, Cindy, we're working at ACSA to bring the state together and say, is there a way for us to do this statewide so that we can effectively test our employees and students? Because as you said, safety is the most important thing. Laura, as we talk about safely reopening, if that's 100% distance, especially if it's a hybrid, these issues of privacy are huge, and it's always an important issue for us, but especially now in kind of these times, the way we're doing the work. Talk to us about some of the privacy issues, some of the best advice you've heard given, so that our members can benefit from your experience with this issue of privacy.
Well, thanks, Wes. Obviously, when we started dealing with privacy issues in the legislature and beyond, we were dealing with brick and mortar classrooms, and now our classrooms are in people's homes. And that's causing for a lot of our members and our staffs, concern about where their role begins and ends. And if they're seeing things or hearing things, and we're already getting a lot of reports back from our members about their staffs hearing and seeing things that they probably would not have seen or known about necessarily during a non-COVID time where you're not doing distance learning. So we at ACSA have been really working with, different lawyers and also working with the Department of Justice and the FBI to really start developing what can we do to help you. And remember that mandated reporting is incredibly important, not just because our students aren't in our classrooms per se, but they're in our classrooms by being in their homes. And so we really are continuing to work. We have heard a number of disturbing stories. Unfortunately, some of you have seen things on the news about things that have happened during online classes, but really recognizing that we are there in people's homes. The other piece of the privacy part is where can teachers be recorded and where you can't be. And that is really, there was a piece of legislation recently that extended the requirement that you have to get the teacher and principal sign off before you can record them in a classroom. Again, that legislation was originally around brick and mortar in the classroom. Now that's been extended to when teachers are teaching from home. So you still have that requirement where you have to get the permission of the teacher and the principal in order to record. And we know that there's a lot of pressure from parents who want to record our teachers so that they can come back and have, go over those programs with their students later. But I think it's one of the things that we all have to be very mindful of is that our classrooms are now in people's homes, and that we still must treat that the same as we would if we were in a brick and mortar classroom.
No, thank you, Laura. And I meant what I said at the beginning of our broadcast. I've learned everything from other people. Certainly you and Brett and Sal back in the day gave me that entree into advocacy and government relations. And you continue to do that as I am blessed to work side by side with you. And I know this is a big issue for you. Cindy, anything that you'd add from the ground level about this issue of privacy and the can of worms that it has really opened for us?
Well, I think this is the opportunity within our schools that we have to continue to remind our teachers about their mandated reporting responsibilities. We always try to say to people, we do our online trainings every year and everyone takes it, but I always have to remind people over and over again, it's not our decision whether or not something is a viable report. It's that if we suspect something, we have to report. And so that constant reinforcement from us as the leaders, reinforcing with our staff that we really need to do that. We need to be protecting our students, when they're at home and when they're in school.
Hey, I want to remind all of our ACSA family watching this tonight, please like the video so that more of our folks stop in on Monday nights and learn from their brilliant colleagues like Cindy and Laura. Also, if you have questions, please put them in the chat and we'll get to those as time allows. Another issue, Cindy and Laura, that both of you work on is collective bargaining. As we reopen schools, as we determine safety precautions, all of them, testing, everything, right? We have to collectively bargain so many of these issues. And we've said here at ACSA that we are always better off when we collaborate and we jointly create the best solution for our stakeholders. And that there are some things we need to and have to negotiate. And there are other things that are management prerogative, but certainly collective bargaining is front and center. Cindy, share some of the things you're working on, some of the things you've seen around the state, some of the great examples of folks coming together and jointly solving these safety challenges for adults and the students they serve.
So for instance, Wes, and our district is not unique. I think there's been a lot of school districts that have put together subcommittees to look at safety, to look at instruction, to look at, mental, social, emotional health, and brought in the stakeholders from around their school district, their classified employees, their administrators, their certificated employees to sit down and have those discussions around, here's what the guidelines say, what kind of practices are we going to be putting in place in our school district. And I think you're absolutely right, Wes. It is imperative that we collaborate with our associations because, their members are our employees. And ultimately, us working together helps them assure their employees that, yes, in fact, we're looking out for their safety. We're looking out for putting the best practices forward as we're reopening. And then it also helps us with our employees, getting them back in front of students. And that's what we all need to be doing together.
Yeah. And it's certainly my hope too, Cindy, and I believe it's the case, throughout the state, that as folks are bargaining these safety precautions and how they're going to protect not only the students, but the adults in the system, that they're also looking to protect the district moving forward. I tell people all of the time, the state used all of its budget bag of tricks in 1 year. During the Great Recession, the state would kind of stretch these out. Let's use this deferral this year and this trick next year. The state used them all this year. I think we all understand that the economy is going to be challenged as it responds to this pandemic that we expect to spike again somewhat during flu season. And so districts, really need to be thinking long term, and certainly my hope that's a part of the conversation as well, that our students have high quality offerings, not just this year, but every year they're in our care. Laura, about collective bargaining, things you're hearing, best practices you're seeing out there in the field.
Well, I'm not saying anything that our members don't already know, but it is challenging because of the unknown. And Cindy and I were talking earlier today, and what's unique about schools is that our business, if you will, is our students. And the way to educate our students is the best way, at least we think so far, is to be in person with them. And so how do we navigate that? That's what you're hearing a lot from our conversation today, is how do you navigate the safety of our employees and our students while also serving our students to the best of our ability? So it is pretty varied out there. I will say, Cindy's a stellar example of some of the things that go well. It's not that easy in some parts of the state. We recognize that. That's why we have our Personnel Institute next week. Those of you who are interested in these issues, please go online and look at possibly joining us. We're going to have parts of it are going to be virtual. Some of it's going to be in person. When it's taped beforehand, you can go back and listen to it whenever you want. But we're tackling all of these issues that our members are bringing up. How are you going to reopen schools? How are you going to evaluate employees? How are you going to discipline employees? How are you going to ensure that our students are learning? How do we reopen? All of the things that fall under the lens of HR, which is so broad. And Cindy touched on it a little bit, but I also want to, just as a staff member representing our incredible members, is in the role of HR, your job is to make sure that your employees and your students are all being taken care of and providing all those services that they need. But we want to make sure that you and HR are being taken care of as well, because you're so giving and making sure that you're taking care of everybody else. So how do we ensure that those of you that are in those roles are able to get the same kinds of help or support that they're giving others? So we're going to tackle, I think, all of those issues next week. Certainly, there's a lot to it. And Wes, you sort of alluded to also the issues financially. We're going to have some budget conversations as well. We have issues of liability. The workers' comp laws just changed in California to now address COVID. We're having lots of lawsuits coming at us in different environments. So there's a lot that's coming at our members all at once, not to the least, that we've had to, shift public education on its ear on a dime, that so fast, and how we're now having to implement all those things. So I think Personnel Institute when we're in person, it's phenomenal. I think this year it's going to be even more important because the topics are so relevant as we're sort of moving into maybe more in-person learning and support for our students.
Yeah, thanks, Laura, for bringing that up. And I know Cindy helps plan this event as you do, and I want to give her a chance to kind of speak to some of the highlights. I think it's exciting. We've been saying at ACSA from the beginning of this, let's use this crisis as an opportunity to innovate, to get better at what we do. Let's reframe this crisis as an opportunity. And here's yet another example. We've been doing conferences pretty similarly for a long time. Here's a great way of being forced to do it a little differently, to do it on our schedule. I think it's exciting, and I'm looking forward to it. Cindy, some of the things you're looking forward to, again, the Personnel Institute starts the 30th through the 1st, although some of the online content will be available, I think, as early as the 28th. Yet again, an innovation we haven't always seen. So some highlights that excite you and the planning committee.
Well, we're very excited, as you were saying, Wes, because we're going to have the opportunity to have some sessions that are taped that you can watch over a course of 4 or 5 days at your leisure, as well as live sessions. We're going to have over 35 sessions that are available from your home. Our legal group that is going to be presenting, all of our attorneys that support ACSA will be having a number of presentations. We're going to be doing our normal hot topics where we'll have individuals from our Human Resources Council. talking a lot about what have we been doing during COVID, what are some of the approaches we've been using during COVID, so that people can hear right from the field themselves. As you were saying, we're going to have school services here talking about budget. We're going to be talking about leaves. I think that's a topic that we hadn't talked about. Leaves are a really big issue right now, as far as when we're dealing with the Family First Coronavirus Act in regard to individuals that need interactive accommodation meetings. That's going to be covered. It's going to be a lot of the live content is going to be wonderful, because you're going to be able to sit, and we're going to have some question and answer opportunities for people to be online, giving, asking questions, getting answers, listening to attorneys. We're going to have an attorney panel talking about some of the issues that have come up during COVID and how they're advising to deal with those with questions that they're going to be able to do. We're also going to have opportunities to ask our keynote speakers questions through live chat as they're presenting. So we're very, very excited about that.
That absolutely is exciting. I mean, again, don't get this twisted. There's some pre-recorded stuff. There's a lot of live stuff, just like this broadcast, where you can ask questions and really direct how it goes, just like you would if you were in a conference where they allowed you to ask questions, and they don't always do that. So I think this again presents some opportunities for us. Speaking of opportunities, a lot of our committees and councils now are doing regular calls, where we used to have quarterly meetings. Superintendents are meeting weekly to have conversations. I know that the HR Council is going to start to do, I think, monthly calls where folks can call in and get the best advice and share from one another. And so I'm really, really excited about all of these innovations and others to come. We did have a question. Let's see where we had the question. Tanya Gillick asked a question. What are some districts doing to boost the care for their employees right now? And this is something that we've been talking about for weeks. Last week, we had some folks sharing a practical guide for funding mental health. So there are ways to get this done. But it's a great question. We can't get away from this question and the appropriate answers and resources that are out there. So Cindy, give us one thing that your district's doing to care for your employees right now.
So one of the things that we're doing, we're very fortunate to be part of a our insurance group, Viva. And Viva has a lot of online mental health and also just wellness opportunities for employees. Because I think when we're in times like this, it's a lot about taking care of our own wellness, taking time to do things that you need to do. I think they offer online yoga, and they offer meditation, and they offer, cooking classes, but things so you take time for yourself, because if we don't take time to rejuvenate ourselves, we have nothing left to give. And as leaders, we're always giving. And so I think that's, as we're looking in our district, we're looking at pushing some of those things out and trying to help more and more in that regard. And then as leaders, checking in on each other and checking in on our employees, I think is really crucial.
Yeah, Gianna, if you can help us, Laura answered a question that Amy Collier put in, and it's an important one about teacher evaluations. And while ACSA is doing some work, not a lot of conversations at the state level, but help us get that into the chat so our members can see that response. Listen, we always like to end with hope. What gives us hope? Cindy, I'll say this. When I heard you at the beginning, just come back to relationships and listening, it gave me hope because I truly believe it is the relationship that carries the day. Relationship with our employees and between our employees and students. And so I want to thank you for inspiring that hope in me, and once again bringing up listening and relationships. Laura, what gives you hope?
I've said this many, many, many times. I feel so blessed to work at ACSA and supporting school administrators throughout the state. We have, our HR council has been meeting regularly, kind of on just an informal way, just to connect. And the things that I hear that you, not just in HR, but all of you ACSA members are going through, and how you're serving our students and the other staff, to me is incredibly uplifting and very, something I take a lot of awe in, and it keeps me going. I know the rest of our staff probably feels the same way, but really feel very hopeful knowing that all of you are trying to do the very best that you can in order to serve our students and really be just an incredible example for what I think all of us professionally would like to be doing as well.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you. Cindy, how about you? What gives you hope?
I think feel so blessed to work with all of the different leaders, both in my district and up and down the state, that, everyone is in it for the kids, and that's what we're all about. And then as we're bringing students back and to see the excitement of our teachers and our classified staff, everyone pitching in to make things happen. We have bus drivers that are out helping pull weeds on our campuses. We have our custodians are just working so hard, and our principals are taking their creativity on making everything safe for kids. And, it's all about our students, and working with all these amazing professionals gives me hope, because we will get through this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Look, next week, ACSA Family and Friends, we've got Flippin from the Flippin Group. Is going to come in and talk to us about inspiring leadership, how we inspire hope in others. So really, really excited about that. It's a topic you've asked for. I want to thank Cindy and Laura for taking time out and missing the first part of the Raider game tonight. Thank you, Cindy and Laura, for everything you do, for what you've shared. By the way, folks, the Personnel Institute is not the only thing we're going to be doing virtually. We also have our Leadership Summit. And so we want to make sure that folks are signing up for that as well, coming together, improving our trade so that our students benefit. That's what it's all about. Folks, thanks for tuning in tonight. Remember, stay safe, be well. We'll see you next week with Flip.